Hello, this is Scott Hall, and I'm going to share a bit of information which may be critical to your success with undertaking regenerative agriculture and specifically here syntropic agriculture. Now, it's about working in the correct successional group where you start. Now, what I mean by that is working with, generally when we start out, maybe with a pasture or a paddock, working with what we call placenta 1 and placenta 2. Now, it's about biomass generation and using that biomass to feed the system, allowing it to recover, and having the system benefit from it through its natural ecological cycle. Now, when we cut or prune any plant that's well established, healthy and thriving in the system in the correct successional niche, it releases growth hormones, a growth pulse we call it, and we time that through correct management. Now, that's essential to the way the syntropic agriculture framework works. It's the way ecology has been decoded and put into a framework by Ernst Gost. Now, what we tend to do, and I am most definitely guilty of this, when we start a syntropic system or start this planting arrangement, we want to push too far into the future and put too many trees in of too high of a life requirement for where the system is at the time. We tend to try to fill it full of vegetables as well. We ask too much, but while we may gain from the vegetables, etc., it requires a heavy input to get that. Now, that's not necessarily syntropic. It may be in context a really good way to start, depending on what you need and what your project, what those goals are. But it still doesn't and shouldn't take away from the driving power, which is management of biomass and pruning and using plants in species succession. So I'm going to take you through some videos, so narrate over some photos and show you some examples and explain further what I mean. So I'm going to use some of Ernst's words, is that systems can get too hungry systems where we put too much in that require too much life, and it ends up becoming a management issue. It ends up becoming an energy sink. It becomes entropic. It's not syntropic. It doesn't go through the continual positive feedback loops, which are syntropy and ecology. Now, I do see it a lot. We just spend too much time trying to figure out food plant consortiums and what trees should go with what, etc., and trying to just spend so much time into these elaborate food production consortiums without a lot of mindfulness towards the biomass and the ecology that drives those food plants that we seek. And that's where we need to focus. And it's a lot easier than what you think. And I'll explain that in the video. So I want to call us out on this common mistake that we make, which is what I call front-running the macroorganism. Essentially, we don't build the macroorganism. We try to make food, and production. Ironically, we get more food and more production faster if we get arranged and set up with the macroorganism the right way and manage that through the interface of the consortium. We develop a consortium that generates biomass with strong and powerful plants that provide for the food crops we desire through those strong growth pulses that they provide. So it's all about working in the present and working with what you got and working with that immense power that is there. It's like the tortoise and the hare. We take the route of the tortoise and do everything properly and get to the end sooner because it doesn't look as fast, but we're not spending our time managing sick plants and pulling weeds out and trying to maintain something that nature's trying to correct. We go back to that power and work with that power instead of working against it. So I hope you enjoy this. So here's an example of a very early syntropic planting. This was at Gabbala in 2016, perhaps earlier. Anyway, very, very early. Probably the first planting in Australia. But this was done on the typical way that depending on your context, but I tend to advise against. Because yes, we may need a lot of plants really quickly. We may have a context that tells us we need that, particularly if we've got a market garden crop that we need. But still, there's other ways of doing that, which are beyond the scope of this video. But the primary mistake is there's too many plants and not enough biomass generation. Now, it's not just the biomass generation that's super important, but it's the positive feedbacks that come from generating biomass in the system, which is the growth pulses, which give a positive feedback to more biomass and more crop, and it keeps spiraling up, which is the management of the macroorganism. So there's a lot of imported biomass here and nothing really growing because it's what Ernst calls a hungry system, wanting too much. All the trees are planted. Some of the trees are beyond the successional stage of the conditions in that system there and now. They demand higher life. So there's all sorts of problems that are there before it all even begins. And here we have it again. This is the same system a little bit further down the track, where, you know, it's just being pushed too far. Too many plants wanting too much out of it. Too much focus on consortium in the sense of life cycle and strata with production plants. Just too much, extracting too much out of it, wanting too much. We're running the macroorganism. The macroorganism hasn't had time to build to support the type of plants that we've put in there and we're expecting. We just haven't put enough supporting plants in there, like castor oil, Mombasa grass, even, you know, Napier grass, and lower succession crops which we could yield on the way. Of course, the bananas are okay, they're lower succession, but we could be having loquat, tamarillo, and other plants like that. You know, we're just pushing and asking too much, and way too many vegetables. We want way too many vegetables, and if we wanted that sort of level of vegetables, perhaps we could have become market gardeners, but of course that conflicted with our goals of agroforestry. But another example again of wanting too much too quick, of the wrong type of outcome. We could have done a lot better in many ways, which I'll go into. So here we are again with vegetables, asking too much. In this photo, it is about a year later, and as you can see, the trees are growing to some extent, but it's still a little bit hungry. There's no biomass generation. I've brought all of that in. Sure, I got great results. I started getting a real macroorganism developing with the trees, but at the end of the day, it could have been a lot better, a lot quicker. Again, too much focus on plants that are producing and not enough focus on supporting plants, which ironically amounts in less production. So we'll go on to another picture after this. Now here's a photo of the same system 4 to 5 years on. There's been a big difference in the macroorganism, largely due to management. The macroorganism did develop, but management was responsible for how fast it developed and to what level of complexity that it developed to. Now, as you can see, we're still producing vegetables. There's a alley crop of zucchini there, and I was able to produce more zucchini in that single alley row than I was as if I was going to plant out that whole area left and right of it, with the middle included, in monoculture. And we did research on that, and the numbers provided that, as opposed to the Australian Department of Primary Industries yield data on monoculture. So we were able to do that. We got our vegetables, all of the vegetables we needed, plus they were very healthy vegetables, and this photo was actually taken in one of the worst droughts in Australian history 3 years ago. Now, what I want to point out is that yes, the macroorganism is going really well. It's actually a fantastic system, and that system provided water to those zucchinis. much more water than I could provide through irrigation, due to the fact of the huge amount of the huge level of dryness from the drought. It was quite extreme. But yes, there was definitely water sharing going on, and the zucchini benefited from the macroorganism. Now, the trees are finally all sitting in their relevant successional niche, and are all doing their job as they should. But what I want to point out is, to the left and right of that zucchini, even though you can see Swiss chard growing there, which was like a pasture crop, it was sown into a crop of Panicum maximum that's each side of the zucchini. So the zucchini are pushing outwards each side, big plants, but the zucchini occupied the centre third, with each side third providing biomass, with a double crop of Swiss chard, which is a pasture cropping technique that is quite common in other places elsewhere in regenerative ag. But we've got full biomass coverage over the soil in all ways. There is good coverage over the tree row, and good coverage over the inter-row where the zucchinis are. Now, the reason it went so well is we went back to appropriate plants. We went back to grass. We went back to focus on biomass production and to get the positive feedbacks from managing biomass. And it's not just about quantities and space. It's about those positive feedbacks. Now, I really would like you to have a good think about that, and what syntropy really is, and how it really works, and how these types of yields are achieved. Now, what we have here is a contemporary installation of syntropic agriculture at Gabbala, done much later, after learning everything. And as you can see, there's not much to look at, but there's a lot going on. So here we have grass rows with a crop row in between each, and this is accumulation. This is working within the placenta and placenta 2. This is where we've got appropriate ecological planning, where we have crops growing what we need. Yes, we've got, actually, this is tomato cropping. So yeah, we're still growing vegetables, but we're growing them in harmony with the ecosystem, in relation to the successional conditions that are there. We're letting the macroorganism be strong where it needs to be. We're not trying to make or ask of a macroorganism that can't exist in those conditions. That's what we're doing. So we're not front running it, we're working with it. And over time, that will develop into tree rows when the trees germinate. You know, every fourth crop row being a tree row eventually, but we're working with the system and growing with it. It grows at its own pace, ironically a lot faster than those systems that I showed earlier. So in 4 to 5 years, I would be a lot further down the track than the one I previously showed you, which was still good, but mainly because of the management shift. Now, I will say that at this point in time when that photo was taken, we had Enrique Souza visit us from Brazil, and he had a good look around the whole place, and there's some things that he liked. But what he mostly liked was this system, what we were doing here and now. He had a lot of good things to say about what we were doing and what we'd learned and what direction we had moved towards. It is actually syntropic. So that's the evolution over 5 to 6 years at Gabbala, where we went, and we spent less and less energy and got more and more yield out of more simple systems based in appropriate successional conditions, working with the macroorganism in its strength at that period in time. So now I've started a new farm. Of course, limits were reached at Gabbala. It was not big enough. It was only about an acre, about a hectare at the most, and not big enough to achieve the goals that I wanted, which was I'm a farmer. I need to live off what I do, And ultimately, I want to provide jobs and economic growth based on syntropic agriculture, so I had to move on. And I've moved on to a newer, bigger block, which is ultimately around about between 15 to 20 acres, depending on how it's utilised, and I have options to go bigger as well. And I'm very confident about where it's going to go, largely because I've had already had a season. I've already got a season under my belt now, and I have had a win. You know, there have been challenges, particularly scaling up, because when you have a problem, it's a big problem because of the scale. But you know, I'm a fairly experienced farmer, but I've got a lot of made a lot of mistakes in the past, and they're not so big anymore, so I can manage that. But no, all in all, I'm very, very happy. I'm very satisfied where things have gone this season on the new block and the way that I've started. Yes, I've made mistakes, and if you are a member of the Pathway to Regeneration, the Syntropic Agriculture Learning Platform that I run, you will know all about that because that is all published there and how not to make those mistakes. But all in all and in general, I'm very, very happy, and I'm really looking forward to next season, next spring and next growing season. But coming into this winter too, I might have a couple of tricks that I can play as well. We'll see how we go with that, but I'm feeling good about a few perhaps kind of somewhat radical things that can be done this winter with some cropping of tomatoes. We'll see, but I'll keep you posted. So yeah, everything's great. It all comes down to managing that macroorganism as it is. You know, the macroorganism just doesn't exist and you go and make it. It's there, it's everywhere, but it's the complexity, the level of complexity that it has. So working with it and then building it is the key. And yeah, it's all about the grass management. So I'll leave you with a short little video of the last time we managed the grass, and you can see how it's all coming together structurally, and pay attention to that. Don't try to look for too many fantastic looking pictures of trees, because the health lies in the system under the ground and in in mysterious ways. But yeah, thanks for watching. I'd just like to postscript this video with a quick summary and some encouragement. Now, when recognising the working in the relevant successional group that you're in the relevant successional niche that you're in at the start, and working with grasses, etc., things build more quickly and more powerfully. The ecosystem gets stronger in appropriate ways. The soil life increases quickly, and it adds soil carbon much more quickly. Things get digested because everything's appropriate in the space with the microbiology that's there. Now, in that one season that I've started on my new farm, we've already built 1 inch of topsoil. And I will be getting some soil tests done to compare the difference between the soil tests that we got done at the start and where we are now after one season. I would also like to add that it's a lot easier to do. Instead of overextending yourself and tying up resources that may not give back in trying to push too far forward, if we stay in that successional niche that we're in and we work in the present, and we work with the grasses and with the appropriate plants. It's not always grasses, but specific types of woody trees and woody weeds and vegetable crops and whatnot, grain crops too. They work in this space beautifully. It makes the cost a lot lower, and you get a lot more back. You get a better yields, more healthier plants. I will be publishing more about the health of plants in another video where I've got some fantastic news to share on that with the results there. But you know, managing those grasses and building, it's a management-based process in tropic agriculture. It's specific and precise. You know, it's something you need to learn, but it's not a big investment. But when you get the hang of it and start it, things do move up quickly, and you do start getting fertility without inputs, without the external inputs. And as you saw in the last video that I shared in that, the last clip I shared, I had a hay rake to manage that grass. That worked really, really well. But look, it works really well on a smaller scale with a brush cutter with a blade on it and a hay fork. We've done that for years, and we did it, and we monitored the time and the margins there, and it works. It's totally doable. You know, it's really economic to do, and we actually did it by hand as well with a cutting it by hand with a knife and monitored that, and it was still viable. So we don't need to rush into trees. We're going to overextend. So, but what we can do is stay with the power that's there and work with that, and we can yield quite well, quite highly. So it's really doable. It's really highly applicable to agriculture today, now, depending on the approach and your management. It really works now. Please follow me, like and subscribe to this channel, and follow and see where I go with this, because I'm very, very confident and very really buoyed by the results that we've got so far just by managing the ecology in situ as it is now, and doing all we can to increase succession by working with the consortium, with that construct of the consortium, and boosting that macroorganism and working up through species succession into higher and higher levels of yield and abundance. Now, you know, like my farm is a banana and taro farm, but it could be in another climate, a berry or grain farm, or apple or pear or apricot farm. It doesn't matter. It all works the same way. If you visit my website, www.syntropia.com.au, you can see I've got some blog posts about that sort of thing, about climates and how it can range across climates and how it works. But yeah, it's doable now. So follow me, see where I go, and see what I can get done, and save money. Don't go spending money at the fertilizer shop. Work with the ecology. We've got plenty of that around. We always fight against it most of the time, but working with it yields. And one more thing, if you are interested in learning more about it, we have a high quality learning platform with an inbuilt online course and a community group, an interactive group with a lot of resources, plant resources, a lot of combined knowledge, group learning, and much more. So there's a lot there, and if you really are serious about it and you want to take this forward and do something with this and regenerate, if you want to increase your profitability, if you want to prosper in the future, if you want to make this your career, please consider joining the Pathway to Regeneration, our online regenerative agriculture learning platform, where things are moving forward really well. There's a lot of content there already, hours and hours of content, and increasing amounts of content. And if you want to know more, I've got a link in the description, so just have a look below and see what you think. Thank you.